Welcome everyone to day 2 here at SIGGRAPH 2023. I'm Matthias, aka Major VFX on all the socials. You can find me there. Been doing this for a long time, showcasing amazing artists in the world of Cinema 4D, Red Giant, Redshift, and now from the ZBrush family. Man, am I excited to announce the extremely talented Ana Carolina. Woo! Big round of applause. Come on, internet, give it up. We can hear you. We can hear you. All right, go get it.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks, Ian. Hello, everybody. My name is Ana Carolina. I am so proud and happy to be here. Thank you to Maxon for bringing me over. This is my first SIGGRAPH, and I'm extremely happy and excited. So in today's demo, I'm going to be showing you all how to render your ZBrush models directly into Unreal, skipping all of the in-between steps of retopology and going into softwares like Substance, Painter, Designer, Mari, you name it. So we're going to be making our maps and our UVs and everything else directly inside of ZBrush and then just jumping right in. Just for the overview, I originally made this model on a live stream and I rendered it out in the ZBrush to Photoshop plugin, which is a very awesome plugin that comes straight in ZBrush where you can composite different layers of the render by adding manually the lights and doing, cool stuff in Photoshop. The only downside of this is that you're working with layers, and you can only really do one view at a time. So if you change your mind about the angle, or your client asks you to change something about the model, you actually have to go back and re-render the whole thing, recomposite the whole thing. It's kind of not the most solid workflow. This is really good, though, if you want to just get a quick little render out to preview or something like that. If it's not too work intensive, but it's just enough for me to want to use Unreal. So here we have a little GIF of the progress of in Photoshop, kind of like layer by layer, going from preview to, updating it as we go. This is the final render on the right in Unreal. The cool thing about this is that, one, it's real time, so you don't have to wait for it to render, and you can get multiple iterations out really quickly. You can just update the files as you go by exporting. The lighting is all physically based. It all uses PBR, and it's just a really fun software to play with. So today I'll be walking you through the basics of how to get your model out of ZBrush into Unreal and make a render something like this. Our main focus today is going to be on the material and texture setup and the lighting process. So we're not going to be talking too much about any advanced topics in this field of the Unreal process. So who am I before I get too far into this? So I am a VR developer and technical artist who's always been drawn to characters. I do a lot of ZBrushing on the side, a lot of character work, freelancing. In the past, I've worked for NASA, HDX Labs, and Uncomfort, a company that did digital sedation, as in basically anesthesia with virtual reality. I can talk about that for days if you guys want to talk to me about it later. And I've worked for a lot of companies, done a lot of projects for a lot of companies like MasterCard, the Air Force, and things like that. Right now, I am a professor at the Ringling College of Art and Design. I work in 2 majors, game arts and virtual reality. And I teach a little bit of everything, and you'd be surprised at how little ZBrush I actually teach. On the side, I have a lot of online presence and online education. I've worked with a bunch of wonderful companies, obviously like Maxon, NVIDIA, Frozen, etc. And I have my own mentorship and online education company. I have a lot of different skill sets, including environment arts, character arts, and programming. It's all related to the game sides of the pipeline, which is why I'm so excited about Unreal. And a few other things. One thing that's notable is that I recently started a podcast called Industry Standards, where I interview amazing professionals from all sorts of from our fields. So motion design, VFX, animation, film, games, VR. And so if you guys want to be on the podcast, let me know. I'm looking at some of you guys in the audience. So in the past, I think I accidentally skipped the, In the past, I did a demystifying post-production webinar with Maxon on the Maxon training team channel, in which we put together the scene over 4 weeks. So if you'd like to learn more about Unreal and the ZBrush to Unreal pipeline, please check that out. It's on the Maxon training YouTube channel. We made these little guys. For this one, we actually went through Substance Painter. And then for NAB, we put together this, remember that? We put together this environment and game. That little guy right there is Axel, and Ian, who's in the audience, made him. And I just animated him and put him in the level. I made the environment, and it was all done inside of ZBrush and then set up in Unreal as well. So if you guys would like to know how I made all this, you can check out that video from NAB from last year. I had a lot of fun with this one. I kind of got carried away. I still haven't finished it. It's not in my portfolio. That's my life story right there. Let me try to get out of this view. If you'd like to learn more about ZBrush, I have a great recommendation. There's something called Z Classroom Online, where we've broken it all down into really accessible and easy tutorials to follow along. There's about 27 videos, and I made them, so I'm very proud of this. So all of the progress, all the sculpting of the mermaid character that I put together for this presentation today was done on ZBrush Live channel. So it was all done live, so you can actually go check that out as well and actually see the entire process beginning to end as I went through and used multiple ZBrush features to actually sculpt the character. We're not going to be sculpting her today, unfortunately, but we are going to be rendering her. So if you are curious about the process, please check that out as well. Here's a awesome reel that my intern, Sean, put together for us here last night. At like 11 p.m. I messaged him. So yeah, we talked about how to poly paint, how I made the hair using some really neat features, and got the actual render in Photoshop done. So if you end up hating what I teach you today and you want to do the ZBrush to Photoshop plugin, go check that out as well. So let's jump right into it. The first thing we need to know in order to render your work in Unreal is that Unreal needs UVs. UVs is not necessarily a workflow that everybody is used to. So what they are is basically a 2D flat projection of the model that we can apply like pixel data onto. So things like base color, roughness for like glossiness, metallic, and things like that. So we need to get UVs done. UVs can be quite a laborious process in most software, in which you have to select exactly what parts you want to break to get apart in the 2D space and things like that. Thankfully, ZBrush has a fun little plugin that comes with ZBrush called UV Master, which does the UVs automatically. It is a great feature for if you're in a rush or you, just like me, you just want to get a render done. It's not necessarily the best workflow if you are doing a professional, for example, game art piece, but it gets the job done. And honestly, I've shipped a few things like that, just nobody noticed, you know? So let's talk about UV Master. So the way you're going to find the UV Master is right here, Z plugin. I'm going to take this whole tab and tab it off to the right because I'm going to be using this quite a bit today. And I'm going to find UV Master right there. So to start with, we have two options. We can just unwrap or unwrap all, which will unwrap all of my subtools. These are my subtools right here. You can't see them right now. There they are. It can unwrap all of my subtools, or I can just unwrap the selected one, which is what I want. I can have symmetry on or off, which will try to make a symmetrical UV. I personally don't turn this on unless I know for a fact my model is perfectly symmetrical. Otherwise, we might get errors or, it might crash. So I just turn that off. If you have good polygroups, you can turn that on, and it will actually split the polygroups you have into the islands, right? Because as you split it, you have to break the model apart. It's just impossible to keep it in one piece. So we call those islands. What I'm going to do is, instead of just hitting unwrap right here, I'm going to hit this button, work on clone, because by working on a clone, I'm going to actually be able to find more features such as these that are hidden. So I'm going to hit work on clone, and what that's going to do is it's going to take the lowest subdivision of my model by default, and it's going to turn it into a new tool. So right up here in my tool panel, I now have an extra tool that is just the model that I have, which is the low poly version. It helps to have a pretty low poly version, and it helps a lot to make sure that it's all quads, or as many quads as possible. A decimated model might not work quite as well as we might hope, okay? So here's my low poly version. What I'm going to do next, get my plugins open. I can just hit unwrap. Boop. Gotta do sound effects for every button. Get used to it. Boop, boop. Right. And then I can check my UV by hitting flatten. And that will simply flatten it out. So somewhere around here, her face is, you know. One cool thing you can do in ZBrush, by the way, is you can sculpt on the UVs, which is really fun. So I can flatten and unflatten. I can also hit this button, check seams, which will highlight with a color orange everywhere that a seam has been cut. This is where the model has been cut to be split apart. You might have noticed this in movies and games before, but if you have a seam in the model, you might be able to see where the textures are broken. They don't quite match up, and you get an ugly little line, or as we call it, an artifact in the industry, where you can see that. There's no way around seams, but what we can do is we can hide them. The best way to hide them in a character model is behind the head, underneath the arms, side, back of the body, anywhere that's low priority, and you're going to see it less on the screen. So the way we can fix that is we're going to hit the button called Enable Control Painting. What this does is it basically allows you to try to manipulate the automatic system to protect certain areas, to not have UV seams on them, and to attract the seams to other areas. So first I'm going to hit Protect, and what that's going to do is it's going to let me paint with red the areas I want to protect, which a high priority area, in my opinion, is the face, right? We don't want an ugly line going right through the face. This being said, all this is doing is trying to manipulate the system. It's not a guarantee that it will work necessarily. ZBrush will do everything it can. If I hit the Attract button, I can paint where I want the seams to go, ideally. So I'm going to paint the back. I think I lost my Protect here, so I'm going to just, try again. I'm using my mouse for this. My students would think that's hilarious because I run around the classroom yelling at them to not use the mouse when they're sculpting. So now I'm going to try unwrapping again. Fingers crossed, everybody. And let's see, check seams. That's a little better, but I still don't want a seam going right through her face like that. So let's try that again. Again, there's no guarantees. This is an automated process. So let's hit unwrap. It's kind of like AI. You kind of just got to try it a few times, to see what's going to happen. I'm not going to sit here and make you guys watch me try this 40 times, but just know that that is how you can manipulate the system a little bit. All right? So once your UVs are done on your clone, you have to bring it back to the original tool. The way you can do this is by hitting Copy UVs. You can go back to your tool. So let me find it here. I think it's this one right here. I can go to the lowest subdivision, and I'm going to hit Paste UVs. If the vertex order of the two models is identical, you'll always be able to paste UVs. What that means is it has the same amount of vertices, and they're all kind of like named the same on the back end. So this is actually a very useful tool, not just for this process, but for multiple processes as well. So now we have UVs. I can go ahead and hit Flatten just to try it out. Oh, it doesn't like that because of the subdivision. So what we can do instead is we can go to the Tool panel, UV Map, Morph UV, and it will just morph the model out into the UVs. And you can kind of see that it has relief. That means you can sculpt on it and do all sorts of fun things to the UVs. You can think of fun, creative ways to use this. Do not export the model like this because it will arrive into Unreal flattened. So before you export it, bring it back, okay? So now we have an unwrapped model. The next step we need to do is we need to worry about the scale. So for those of you who have done 3D printing and on ZBrush before, you know that scale is extremely important, and the same thing is said for Unreal. Unreal uses real-world measurements of centimeters. So what we need to make sure that we do is that the model has proper scale. The reason for that is that because by default, normally 9 times out of 10, the ZBrush model is like this big. I don't know why necessarily. And if you import it into Unreal, it will have an error just like this on the left, where just parts of the model just disappear. I don't know exactly why. So what we need to do is we need to use the Scale Master plugin, which is a very nice little plugin, to scale up this model. I'm going to go ahead and open Z plugin, Scale Master, and what I can do is hit Set Scene Scale first. It's going to ask me what the approximate scale of the scene is right now. I'm going to make sure to use centimeters because, again, that's what Unreal uses, and I just want to be consistent. So I'm just going to hit, let's make her 23 centimeters high. That sounds reasonable. I don't know how big that is, right? And then from here, I can just resize. You see how these sliders have become the same sizes that we just saw? I can just use the sliders to change her height, width, and things like that. So I'm just going to make her about 1 cubic meter here, and then resize subtool. If the all button is on, it will resize all subtools at the same time. So let's try that. It's kind of a scary looking process. And you just gotta wait. I find that you should not try clicking too many times while this is happening, okay? Just leave it alone. I tell my students that all the time, like whenever anything freezes, they just keep clicking. And I'm like, you're making it worse. You're literally making it worse. So there she is. She is scaled up. She's ready to go. She's not gonna look like she got partially vaporized by Thanos in Unreal. The next step we have to do is, I made the other one even bigger, is we actually have to turn the colors and all the other maps into texture maps that Unreal can read, because by default, polypaint in ZBrush is the same thing as vertex color. So it's taking every vertex and painting it a color, right? Which Unreal can read, but not in the way that you might think. So we're going to turn this into 2D texture maps. I've already gone ahead and I've painted the model using polypaints. And again, that process is on the ZBrush Live channel. I'm going to go to Texture Map, and I'm going to go to Create and New from Polypaints. The higher the subdivision you have the model in, the more detailed your texture maps are going to be. If the model is at low subdivision, the texture maps are going to be pixelated and low resolution. So do this at the highest subdivision you can. And then now we have a texture on. Nothing's changed, but now if I take the paintbrush and I select a color, and I try to paint on her, nothing happens, because the color is being overridden by her texture. If I turn texture off, I can paint. Okay? So that is a very confusing little thing that my students stumble on, so I figured I would let you guys know. If textures is on, you can't paint. All right? So now we have a texture on her, just her color. I'm mostly for this lecture going to be focusing on her skin, but every single other part of the model has been textured in the exact same way. So now she has an embedded texture map. Let's export it out as an FBX, and we can import it into Unreal. I'm going to go back to my Z plugins folder, and I'm going to go to FBX Export and Imports, which is the best way to export an FBX. I don't use the export and import on the tool panel. It works best for OBJ, but I don't use that. So here are 3 options that are very important. Selected will only export the selected subtool you have as an FBX. Visible will export all the visible subtools, and all will export everything. Sometimes I make the mistake of clicking all, and it will have all these old subtools that I don't use anymore and things like that in there. Just use whatever is important to you. I'd never change the type of FBX, but what I do want to do is I want to turn on embed maps, because I want the texture map of that color to come in straight with my FBX. I don't want to have to deal with it on its own. And Targa is the best file type for going into Unreal because it just compresses things a little bit better. I'm going to hit export, and that's visible. I want to export all of the parts of the model, because otherwise I'm just going to be dealing with a little eyeball and little eyelashes and things all separately. And so I'm going to go ahead and export that. And I'm going to put it somewhere very destructive on this computer. 1 second. Where can I really mess things up here? I'm going to name this. So this is going to be a static mesh. It's not going to be animated. So the Unreal naming convention for that is SM_mermaid. And I normally do 01. I think I already have one called 00, so I'm just going to go with that. And you just have to wait. Again, don't click it a lot. And one thing that's important is that the file for your FBX will show up in its folder, but it will be empty unless the little words that say file exported show up in here in ZBrush. Okay, so that's something important to know. I've already exported, but luckily I also have a already exported version here. So I'm going to make, this is Unreal, for those of you who don't know. Just real quick, I'm going to talk over the UI, not everything, just the parts you need to know for today. All right, so first we have the viewports. This is where we navigate. It uses multiple different navigation methods. The one I use is Maya controls to navigate, so middle mouse click to drag. Alt left mouse to rotate, and then also right mouse to rotate, and then mouse wheel to zoom. On the right here, we have the outliner, which is going to be a list of every single thing in your level. And we have the details, which if you select anything in your level, it will open up the details of it, like the size, rotation, location, what material is applied to it, that kind of thing. Down here, we have the content browser, which is where all your files live. And you can use these files to apply to your level. And your level is basically where the game takes place, but in this case, it's where the render takes place. Whenever I started this Unreal project, you will get a window kind of like this that lets you choose a bunch of default options. The one I picked was games and blank, but honestly, you'll be fine picking just about anything. The only difference is that these come with pre-made pieces of code. For example, if you want to do like a vehicle game, you can just click that, and then you can just put your car in there. So the one I chose was blank, and I'm going to import my model down here. I'm going to right-click and make a new folder just for this demo, and I'm going to call this one Demo. Gorgeous. In a year, I'll have no idea what all these are. So I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to drag in my model. All you have to do is find the file first. Does anybody remember what I called it? I don't remember. It must be in here somewhere. Hold up. Okay, 1 second. Oh, it helps that the file exported thing happened. I'm just going to hit export again just to see where I put it. Oh, I put it on my drive. Local disk. There it is. Accidentally opened Cinema 4D in the process. That is an essential part. Honestly, you should not skip this step. Okay, so I'm going to drag in my mermaid. I'm going to just click and drag. Sometimes you got to give it a little wiggle before it actually notices that you're trying to put it in. And then let's see. I'm going to try to minimize this, and you're going to get this FBX import options. This is where you can turn on to build nanites. Those of you who have been keeping up with Unreal 5, you know that nanites is kind of a new technique that we are using for high poly meshes that automatically optimizes them for real time. I'm not going to do that today, but that's definitely an option. Okay. The reason is that nanite kind of takes away a few of the options that I enjoy using, such as vertex coloring. Not that we're going to be doing that today. I'm going to leave everything default, and I'm going to make sure that create new materials is on, because I embedded textures into my project, and therefore I want to see them. So I'm going to hit import all. Import all will just import all of them at the same time. And then you just wait. This is an essential part of the process. What? Yeah. The amount of times I get up from my desk when I'm working. Been wanting to buy a standing desk. You know what? I'm going to cancel that if I can. And then, because I already have the model in here. Any questions in the meantime? Let's do an impromptu Cinema 4D lecture here. At least we're ahead of schedule. If I have to restart Unreal, I will. I did use the Curve Alpha for the hair. One of my favorite little things ever. I'm so happy with that tool. And then I used deformers to actually shape it into place, because using the curve again and again gets really tedious. And the deformers just give you better curves at the end of the day. I'm going to try to close Unreal and open it again, because, it's not responding. SIGGRAPH, that's me. This is the beautiful launcher for when you open Unreal. All right. So thankfully, I already have the models imported here. And this is what it's going to look like when you first import the model. So all these spheres are materials, which is what actually gets applied to the model. The squares are textures. All right, they're 2D textures. And then obviously the preview of the models are right here. So it took all of my subtools and kind of split them in Unreal, but I was able to import them all with just one move as opposed to having to import the hair, the eyelashes, and all that separately. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to start a new level. Like that. And what that is, again, the level is the space where the game or render takes place. I just created a new blank level by right-clicking and going to level. And now I can actually start putting together my model. And I'm going to use this level as kind of like a landing area just to preview my model. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in some basic lighting. Unreal 4 had this nice little tab here that let you do that easily. So I'm going to go ahead and add that tab in by clicking on this, quickly add to project button right here, going down and saying place actors panel, and that will allow me to place some actors a little bit more easily. I'm going to go to lights, directional lights, which is the sun, skylight, which is basically going to be like bounce lighting. I'm going to search for sky, and I'm going to bring in a sky atmosphere just to make things a little less gloomy. Bring in a sky, and last I'm going to bring in some fog, which will kind of help the bottom part of the horizon not be black, which will help the skylight bounce lights back at the model. I'm going to go find my model real quick. Grab only the models themselves. All of the materials are already applied by default because all of those textures were embedded in my project. And I'm going to drag her in. And I made her a little big, just a little bit. So she's kind of like a Titan. I'm going to make that smaller. The way you can control meshes is WER. So W for moving, E for rotation, and R for scaling. I don't know why R is not rotation, but I'm going to grab here in my outliner all of my models and make them a little smaller by just grabbing that, the middle one, to make it smaller uniformly. Woo! Or just squish it. That's good too. One sec. Control Z is not working, which is a really funny problem to have. Hold up. Give me 1 second. And we'll fix this right up. I tell my students, no matter how experienced you're going to get, you could have a job making a chair every day. Every day you make a new 3D model of a chair. You can make 1,000 chairs and have 1,000 different issues every time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press Control-G while selecting all my models just to group them into one group so that as I rotate the group, they all kind of rotate together. I can press F on my keyboard, just like in ZBrush, to kind of focus around my model. Looks like the sun is a little too shiny, so I'm going to select my... Oh, that's because I have two suns. It probably doesn't hurt or doesn't help to have two suns. Directional lights, I'm going to go to the Details panel, and every single type of actor or type of thing in your level has different types of details. So I'm going to take here the intensity of the light, and I'm going to turn it down just a bit so I can just see my model a little bit better. All right? Again, we're not rendering it right now. We're just setting up materials and setting it all up. So some people would just stop here, right? It's got the details. It's got everything you need. It's got color, and you can just light it. I'm going to do a few extra things with it. So the first thing is I'm going to teach you how to manipulate the materials. I'm going to go ahead and open up the skin material, which is what we're focusing on today. And we already have some textures attached to the material itself. So this right here is the material, and it has all these inputs for different PBR options. The base color, obviously, is the color of the model. So right now, we already have my little texture map from ZBrush. Looks like I also accidentally exported my normal map. I'm going to delete that for now, just because, I'm going to show you guys how to manually do that. As I delete it, you can kind of tell that the model looks more smooth and less detailed. Okay, we'll get the detail back. So the way you do this is you just, plug in some inputs. We can change the roughness for how glossy the model actually is by doing two things. First, we're gonna make a map for that in ZBrush, but we can also just add a general global roughness here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press down S and click, press down S too much, on the map, on the material editor, and I'm going to call this roughness. What this created is a scalar parameter that just allows me to choose a number. So since roughness is a PBR thing that goes from 0 to 1, 0 being black, 1 being white, I can simply choose the value and plug it right into roughness. 0 is going to be very glossy, and I can hit apply to preview. And I don't know if you guys can tell, but the model is going to be more glossy. You see how it reflects things? I can make it like halfway between rough and glossy, or I can make it completely rough at 1. And that way is a really easy way to just make something generally shiny or not. Same thing can be said for metallic. Right there. 0 being not metallic at all, and 1 being the most metallic. It's almost too much. I probably need the roughness to be lower in order for it to actually look metallic. And you can play around with this. So this will actually get you pretty interesting results just right off the bat. This is not what we're doing today, though. I just wanted to show you all that. Apply will reset or kind of preview the material, and save, of course, you got to save. One thing about saving in Unreal is that every single file that you see in the content browser saves separately. The way to save them all together is by hitting this big old helpful button, Save All, right here. So let's go ahead and make some normal maps in ZBrush. What we're going to do is, you see that the highest poly version of my model has some surface noise, details, pores, things like that. So what we do to make a normal map, and the normal map is going to kind of like bring these details back in material form, is I'm going to go all the way down to the lowest subdivision by pressing Shift-D, and then I'm going to go to, in the tool panel, a normal map, and I'm going to say Create Normal Map. You have to be at the lowest subdivision. There it is, creating the normal map. And now I can simply go to Clone Normal Map, which will allow me to use the texture map here to export it by hand. If I just leave this on and I export the FBX now, the normal map will be automatically embedded. Here's a very, very important thing about ZBrush, is that it automatically turns all the texture maps upside down. And this is a very fun little challenge, especially for my students who panic the moment they see that. So the way we fix that before we export is we're going to hit Flip V right here, and then we're going to hit Export right here on the normal map, and then I'm going to make sure I put it in the right folder, and I'm going to call this T for texture underscore mermaid skin underscore N for normal map. And I would prefer, I'll just leave it as a JPEG, that's fine. Boop. Make sure you hit this tiny little OK button, otherwise it will not export. You can kind of preview what the normal map's going to look like. I'm going to minimize, and Unreal had already brought in my normal map from before, so I'm going to go ahead and connect that to the normal. And you can kind of see, this is before my normal is applied, and then I'm going to hit Apply, and you can see how it's simulating those details. That being said, something looks a little funky, and I go through this every time I'm doing a project. I'm like, I can't quite put my finger on it. Something's funky every time. I've done this 1,000 times, and I'm like trying to wonder what it is. Sometimes normal maps are inverted. So right here on the cheeks, if we look inside of ZBrush, at the highest subdivision, the cheek pores are supposed to be going in. Can you see? But out here, they're going out, so the normal map is inverted. To fix that, you're going to double-click on the normal map itself, open that file type. I'm just going to tab this up here. And I'm going to go ahead and search for Flip in the details. Flipping the green channel will basically turn the normal map inside out. I'm going to save that, and now it's fixed. So that's one little thing to keep an eye out for. Okay, happens all the time with this particular workflow. So again, a lot of people will stop here and just render it out. I want to do a few more things. I want to manually create a roughness map, which again controls the glossiness and the roughness of my model. And what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to manually paint it on. I'm going to make sure that I have texture map off on my model so that I can paint, like so. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure the texture is off as well. And I'm going to select about a 50% gray. And I'm going to go to Color and Fill Object. Everywhere that's dark is going to be more glossy. Everywhere that's white is going to be more matte. So basically, what we're going to do is I'm going to start with about 50% so that I get a nice spread both ways. Then I'm going to take a darker, slightly darker color to kind of start creating some wet areas. And what we see on the face a lot is that the T-zone is the most glossy area. So basically, I'm going to paint on a little bit of glossy. That's too much to me. I want to go like subtle with it, you know, like and just build up. A little bit on the lips is important, right? Lips can be glossy if you want. A little bit of cheekbone highlighter, I like that. And then I'm going to just build up a little bit more and a little bit more darkness around the nose. Some people would yell at me for doing this like this because we're used to, you know, PBR processes and using substance, but this is how things used to be done back when we were mostly using Photoshop for texturing. I don't know if anybody here was here for that. It's too much, right? That's how I learned it in college. And we can keep going. If I go super dark, you know, I can make the lips extra juicy and things like that. And give her a little wet nose. One thing I really like to do is to make the roughness pop is I like to make the inside of the cavities, pores, and wrinkles a lighter color in order for there to be contrast. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to masking, and we're going to select mask by cavity. A lot of you guys have tried mask by cavity before. It basically takes all the cavities and masks them out, like so. And now you can kind of see that all the cavities on her face are masked. I can simply come in here, invert the mask, and maybe paint with a more pale color to make it more matte. I can do this, or I can press Control-H to hide the mask itself, but it's still being applied. See, that is a lot easier to see. So that's way too bright of a color. We do want to build this up subtly over time. If I had more time. And just drag it on. And it's using all the details I had already made before this lecture in order to grab on. I'm even going to get her neck a little bit. This is the only part I textured. Let's ignore her shoulders. I was supposed to finish that ahead of time. So there we have it. So for now, this is my roughness map, okay? If it turns out that my roughness is too shiny or too glossy, too matte, we can go to this awesome new feature that came out in like 2019 under Polypaint called Adjust Colors. Okay, and what this lets us do is, for example, it lets us change the contrast of the overall colors on the Polypaints. It allows us to change the general darkness and general lightness. So in here, I can tweak this out, okay? I'm going to cancel that for now. And we're going to export this the same way we did with the color. So I'm going to go to Texture Map, New from Polypaint. We're replacing the old one. There it is. There's our new one. You can kind of preview it. I'm going to clone this texture. That way it goes up here to my texture left thingy. Flip V. Do not forget the most important step of Flip V. And then export. And this time I'm going to name this one T_mermaidskin_R for roughness. Save that out. Hit the OK button, otherwise it will not save. And then I'm going to import it with much difficulty, because I still don't remember where I'm putting these things. There it is. Sometimes you got to give it a little wiggle, bring it in there, and here's our texture. Thing about metallic and roughness is that they can ignore that seam along the face from my old model. Thing about metallic and roughness is that it can act a little funky. So I open up the texture automatically and I turn off sRGB for that, just to make sure that it's not miscalculating. I'm going to open up my material again. Untab it real quick. Hardest part, is getting all my workspace to fit in one screen. And then I'm going to drag that in and connect it to roughness. Let's try to preview it. Apply. And can you see that her nose got a little glossy? So if I want more, again, I can tweak it out in the in ZBrush. Okay, it's easier than doing it in Unreal for sure. One really good way that I like to preview my roughness is I like to press 3 and hold down, which will create a vector 3 constant, which is basically a RGB node, and put that into the base color as just pure black. That's the default option. And I can kind of see the RGB, the roughness really coming in here. And it's just an easier way to preview. So let's take that off. Delete and apply. So there's our beautiful little roughness. Really fun stuff to make. There's so much more we can do. Let me check the time. So the last thing I want to do is I want to do a mask for my emissive, because in the original render, she had like freckles that were shiny, kind of like Avatar style. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an alpha mask. Those of you who are familiar with alpha masks know that black means we're not going to see it, it's invisible. White means we're going to see it, and everything in between is kind of to the percentage of it being white. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill this object with black paint. So color, fill object, turn off texture. Ooh, try again, like so. So this can be a little hard to see, but now she is completely black. Anything I paint on with white will be visible in Unreal. So I can just do whatever I want. I might grab the paintbrush and put on an alpha. So I'll just do alpha 07. Maybe I'll change the stroke method to spray, and then just kind of spray that on. No, drag rectangle. We'll do her special freckles here. It doesn't have to look good, right? Weird. Woo. All right, so we're going to bring this particular texture into Unreal. I'm going to, of course, new from Polypaints. It's going to turn that into a texture. Clone texture, texture, flip V, export. And for this one, I'm going to name it the same, _A for alpha. If I have multiple alphas, I'll be more specific, but not important. Okay. Looks like I didn't paint her 100% black, which might be a problem. Let me see if I can just show you guys the Polypaint edit Polypaints here. Okay, looks like it's fine. I don't see any difference there. Let's go ahead and import. Like so. And I'm going to go ahead and bring that in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to manipulate the emissive channel with this particular one. Emissive is basically going to be like the lights that your model emits, a glow. So I'm going to go ahead and put it into the emissive color. If I did this directly and applied, let's see what would happen. It would just take my texture, and anything that's black is not going to shine, because you can't have a literal black lights, right? That's just 0% shininess. So anything that's not black is going to be visible through the emissive. But I want to go further with this, and this is something I did a lot during my Mushroom Worlds lecture last year, or this year at NAB. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to blend two colors into that shininess using this as an alpha. The way we do that is, again, press 3 and hold down. That way we can choose colors. So I'm going to do that. 1, 2. And you can just select these and change the color here. I'm going to make sure that one is black, so that's the main skin that won't be shiny. And then this one can be literally whatever color I want. I'll just choose purple for now. The way we're going to blend these using this as an alpha is I'm going to drag out of here, and I'm going to search for a lerp or a linear interpolate. What this node will do is it's going to mix the input for A and B based on the alpha, A being black and B being white, basically 0 and 1. So if I drag this into the alpha, and I put this into my emissive, and I apply, now this color will be seen through the lens of this mask. Okay, so now I can come in here, and this is where some of the fun controls of Unreal come in. I can so easily change things by just setting up my materials in an interesting way. So let's go ahead and apply that. You know, and it's extremely easy to iterate on this model, or even in the future do things like animate the glow, shining brighter, or changing color, or things like that. So I only have a few minutes left. I'm going to save this out, and let's talk about the actual rendering process itself. So what I made was I have a new level. Now that I'm done with this one, I'm going to hit Save All just in case. I do that a lot. Unreal is a very heavy program that could crash. I have a level called No Lights with my old version of the model here, where I put her in. There's very little lighting. Just the lighting you can see here is just a directional light that I made very weak, because I like to start with a dark space, kind of like I was in a photography studio, and then bring in the lights in. And I put in a plane for the background, and all I did was I exported a plane out of ZBrush, painted on it in, I think, ZBrush or Photoshop, and then just brought that in, simple material. So we can start by going to our place actors, and all we have to do is go to the light panel, and we can select A. Again, directional light is the sun. Point light is a light that is like an omni light that shines it in every direction. Spotlight shines it in one main direction in a cone. Rectangular light shines it in one direction in a rectangle. And a skylight, like we said, is more of the bounce lighting, the atmosphere. So I'm going to bring in a spotlight. I like lighting things with spotlights, like so. and I can just drag it, press W to move it around, and I'm going to start with a key light. I'm going to try to do something a little bit 3-point lighting-ish here. So I'm going to try to rotate it towards the model, and we'll notice that nothing's happening because the cone is not long enough to reach the model. That's where we're going to get into the details. So I can change the intensity, but it's really not going to reach it unless I change the attenuation radius, which will actually increase the size of the cone. So now I can keep increasing the intensity, and I can kind of see the light. I think this model is still huge, which is why I have to go crazy with the intensity. You might not ever have to use these kinds of huge numbers. Sometimes just 8 is good enough. All right, so I'm going to make sure that the whole model is within my light. Looks fine. One of my pet peeves is harsh lights, harsh shadows like this. Unless it's intentional, I really hate them. So what you can do in Unreal to fix that is you can increase the source radius of your lights. And you can literally see it in action, kind of smoothing out that light a little bit. So the bigger the source radius, the more spread out the shadow is going to be. I think that the harsh lights, the shadows, just kind of take away from the overall design of the model. So that's going to be my key light for now. Let's put in a fill light kind of from this opposite angle. Sometimes I like to be lazy and just grab this one and press Control D or Alt drag and just create a copy. I'm going to move it down. I'm going to kind of have it from over here. I've heard before that if you use a reddish fill lights on your character models, it kind of gives them the impression of being alive, kind of faking a subsurface scattering effect. So let's do that. I'm going to change the color to a very subtle red by just changing it in here, like so. And I'm just going to pretend that there's blood flow in there. And then I should probably turn down the intensity of this because, you know, classically, the fill lights is not as bright as the key lights. I don't know if I've been calling the key light fill light this whole time. I'm sure the comments will let me know. So there I have my second light. And now my rim lights. I love a good rim light. It's my favorite part. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate my model again, my lights. Alt drag also duplicates. Gonna position it kind of from the back. Woo. Like so. And for the rim lights, I like to make it pretty bright to kind of help the model stand out from the background even more. I like to make it a cool tone normally, especially for this particular model. And one thing I like to do is I like to make the light itself longer as if it was a big rectangle. Maybe the rectangular light might have been a better choice for this, in fact. But basically, I'm going to change the source length and start previewing what that would look like so I can kind of try to get the whole length of the model to be inside of that rim light. So now I'm starting to see a little bit of rim light coming in through the shoulder, a little bit on the hair. I'm going to bring it up even more. To me, lighting is all about just tweaking numbers and going from there. I did like 40,000 different lighting scenarios for this before the presentation. Like so, and even the slightest change of angle will change everything. But if you can see, this is what the final render is going to look like. If it's a game, if it's an ad, if it's an image, movie, video, it's always going to look like this because it's real time. So let me go ahead and totally go out of focus here for a second. And then to hide the lights, you can press G, which is basically stands for game preview. And that way the whole area isn't so messy. And now I'm just going to duplicate the slides, Alt drag. And I like to have double rim lights sometimes. Don't want to bore. I'm pretty sure all you motion design and animation people are better at lighting than me, so I'm not going to bore you all with continuously editing bit by bit all these lightings. But that is basically the overall idea. Once you're happy with your model, which I was in my final render here, beep, beep, beep. All I can do is, I have two options. I can simply take a screenshot from the viewport by positioning myself. I'm going to press F to see this. I can position myself, go to this little hamburger menu at the top left of the viewport, go to high resolution screenshots, and hit capture, which will take a really nice high resolution screenshots. I have plenty of them from the process right there. and you could be done. Or you can go a little further. By the way, this slider here, it'll like basically exponentially increase the quality of your final render, and going too far will crash Unreal, guaranteed. There are very few things that are more guaranteed than that. Okay, so the last thing I like to do is I like to add a camera. So I'm going to search right here in the place actors for a camera. And the one I like to use is a cinema camera actor. It's called Cine Camera Actor, but I always feel silly saying that for some reason. So I'm going to drag that in. We can see here, since the camera is selected, I can see the preview of what the camera is seeing. The camera is also inside of my world outliner right here. I'm going to right-click on it, and I'm going to say Pilots. Piloting the camera means that what I see through the viewport now is the camera, and as I move around in the viewport, I'm actually moving the camera itself. You can pilot anything in Unreal, which is how you get really weird results of like the floor moving out into space, you know? So I'm going to look at it through the lens of my camera, get a good angle. You can have as many cameras as you want and like have preset angles in here. You know, it's really nice. And what you can do is these cameras are set to be based on real world cameras. So in the details panel, if you select the camera, you still have to select it. One sec. I don't have enough space here. Okay. If I select it, I can kind of see a lot of options. If you are a great film person or photographer, you might know a lot of these options, such as aperture to make it brighter or darker. You can change the FOV. You can change saturation, but just by grabbing it. This is a kind of unintuitive little UI here, but if you grab the bottom part, you can kind of change up the saturation like so. Can you guys see the preview? I think I have the wrong camera selected. Sorry, guys. There it is. Change the saturation. You can add chromatic aberration, which is my favorite thing to do. It's so cheesy, but I love it. You can change the start offset as well so that your model is still visible. Bloom, every single type of post-processing you can imagine is on here. So once you're happy with that, then again, you can come in here to the hamburger menu, high-resolution screenshot, capture it, and then there you are. There's your final render. One last thing, you can actually go right here where it says perspective, and you can change to a cinematic viewport. You can set which camera you want to see. Hold up, that's not the one I want. You can set which camera you want to preview, and you can do things such as right here, I believe you can turn on the rule of thirds grids to help with composition. You can do all sorts of good stuff. All right. You can also animate your camera and export a video. And you can also animate the model itself, have it turn around for a turntable. But I'm not going to have time to show that all today. I did show all of that in my Demystifying series where we made the little dragons underwater. So if you are interested in that, go to the Maxon training YouTube channel and click on it, and you can see it. It was week 4 that we did that. All in all, I believe we are complete with today's demo. Yay! 2 minutes, 1 minute and 10 seconds ahead of schedule.
Great job. Great job. Let's hear it again for Ana. I know you just kept clapping, but just keep it going. Just keep it going. So we do have a moment or two for a question, but if you don't finish and you don't get your question asked here, Ana's going to be at Dell, also with Ian. So we're going to have some ZBrush specialists at the Dell booth together, tag team in it. So you'll be able to ask all of your questions there. So we'll have her all set up there. But any other questions here? All right. Well, you do, Internet, you do have all of our contact information up there on the screen now. So stay in touch and stay tuned. We'll be back with our very next presenter right after this.